Well, Margaret Sanger was a devout racist, and that's what people need to know first. And her ideology was one, of course, that we are now finding out more and more today, that basically stemmed from Darwinism, that the survival of the fittest, and that a master race more or less should be bred, and that African Americans, Australians, and other ethnicities that they deemed were inferior needed to be either exterminated or their numbers reduced greatly. She was very profound woman, but yet jaded. And we find that she was relentless in her pursuit of this ideology being implemented in modern society. And so she birthed the Negro Project with the sole purpose of introducing sterilization and abortion to the African American community, and to do it in such a way that they would not be suspicious of her true master plan, and that was to sterilize and reduce the numbers of the community. And she also tutored some of the best, Adolf Hitler. She was a member of the Eugenics Society. She was more, Adolf Hitler commended her for her help in his initiation of his eugenics program, of course, in Europe. And so she has quite, impressive credentials when it comes to the ideology she espoused. And she had members of the Third Reich on her board. It was amazing that no one ever suspected or investigated this woman's background and associations earlier, even during that time. But it was unspoken, it was well censored, it's been the best kept secret in America, but right now it's really coming to light more so than ever before. She was brilliant in her strategy. She also perceived that if you're going to reach the African American, you have to do it from a religious persuasion. You would have to be cleared through the leadership of the church. And so she told Clarence Gamble, the heir of Procter & Gamble, that we ought to hire 3 or 4 colored ministers with engaging personalities and from social service backgrounds to make sure, more or less to be the face of it, to make sure that if anyone should suspect anything, that they would be able to quell any suspicions from the congregation or the people. And so, but that was very insightful insight, and that is how our community, even today, if you look at sociologically speaking, the most respected person in the African American community is still the preacher. Believe it or not, it's still the preacher. And second, the doctor. Third, the politician. She perceived that early and went out and began to commandeer clergy. As a matter of fact, they had contests where they awarded preachers who would give the best sermon to basically to facilitate this plan for the Negro Project, a eugenics sermon, so to speak. And they were awarded money. Planned Parenthood, they have a board of clergy. Recently in Portland, they opened up a mega killing station, and it was clergy present at the inauguration. Once again, this allows it to appear to be socially acceptable when you put a cleric in front with a collar and is talking about the good social good this is going to do for the community. And unfortunately, we're not looking beneath the surface. We have to understand that Planned Parenthood is very good at putting a very, very acceptable veneer on their true agenda. And you have to dig. But upon digging, you'll be horrified to know that they are only fulfilling an ideology that began with its inception, which is Margaret Sanger's eugenic plan, to exterminate, to reduce, to create genocide with nationalities or ethnic groups that they felt were inferior. Eugenics is the targeting of any ethnic group with the goal of either controlling the propagation or the fruitfulness of that group when it comes to birth, or exterminate that group. And the key thing is targeted, and also the key thing is that the goal is to reduce. Genocide is when you are already now in motion with your plan to reduce, and you're now beginning to have the effects that you desired. The numbers are decreasing. Numbers are decreasing. The birth rate is going down. In the African American community today, it's at 1.97. You need 2.1 in order to maintain the present population. Presently, because of abortion, we're at 1.97. We're already beneath the replacement level. And so then at that point, you can say, your plan is working. You've gone, you're awarded in the eugenics community with be able to say that your work is now a genocide. There's genocide going on in the African American community, and if with any cursory search at all, one would be able to truly find the culprit, and it's abortion. What happens to a mind of a person, the moral fabric of a nation that can abort a baby without a pang of conscience? Where will we be 20 years from today? And I went down to help Trent Franks, who currently is under pressure, doing just what you just asked some people to do, step out. He stepped out and said 52% of all pregnancies, African American pregnancies, end in abortion. That's a fact. That's the truth. And people are calling him racist. People are calling him names and ridiculing him for making that comment. And so this is the absurdity of this. First of all, it's a fact. Second of all, it's the truth. Third, it comes from Alan Guttmacher, who sat on the board of Planned Parenthood, who happens to be very proud of that statistic because that's what they're getting paid to do, kill black babies, bottom line. And so if you want to know about how many black babies are being killed by abortion, you go to Alan Guttmacher. I wouldn't even go to this to the census. I wouldn't go because many states don't report. But most of the abortuaries, most of the clinics are some way connected to Planned Parenthood, and the Alan Guttmacher Institute is privy to that information. So, bottom line, people do not want to know the truth on this matter because they're going to have to make some changes if they acknowledge that this is going on. The key thing to understand is that this is what they believe. I used to believe that this was all about money. Now, it is about money for many, but with the core group of eugenics believers and the brain trust of Planned Parenthood, it's ideology. And so, but the good part about it is that people are beginning to understand and to connect the dots and realize that this is being perpetrated against minorities. How Planned Parenthood evolved, of course, you have to go with their founder, as we've stated already, unquestionably a devout racist, one who truly believed in the ideology that she was espousing, and she was part of a global group of elitists, the Eugenics Society, who had the same ideology, and she formed here in this country. It was first called the Birth Control League, and so we find that even then it more or less somewhat reveals what the agenda is, and they began at that point to target the African American community, the Negro Project. Of course, at this time, as stated previously, they already had very strong ties with the Third Reich in Germany, and all the attention was on Germany. And of course, as that progressed, we saw the atrocities. You could see the mutilations of ethnic groups. So as we know that World War II ended and many people were enlightened on Hitler's ways and means. And one of the things Hitler would do, he was very keen on phraseology also, just as Eugenics Society had taught its perpetrators to be feeble-minded, slowful, criminal. All these are words that society understood, and they were basically detrimental, and so you're not going to rush to the aid of the feeble-minded. And Hitler used one called useless eaters, and it was totally accepted by the German people, and he began his eugenics genocide, and it was first with the infirmed. They were not contributing to society, and so after desensitizing the society about their worth, he then realized he had reached to the point where he could continue and go forth with his plan. Of course, as you know, the world was aghast as the stench from the concentration camps and the stories began to pour out from soldiers who were liberating these camps. And so eugenics became a dirty word by the end of the war. And so Margaret Sanger was not deterred from her agenda. She realized she had to change the name from the Birth Control League to something that'd be more acceptable by society. And so therefore was birthed Planned Parenthood. And the ideology the same, the players still the same. The Eugenics Society still very much deeply involved. The only thing changed was the name, Planned Parenthood. So we find today that the Margaret Sanger Award is still being given. Hillary Clinton accepted that award just recently, and without an outcry from anyone. The Smithsonian called Margaret Sanger one of the top 100 women of the century. There's this deception and their willingness to still project her as a great woman and a great social agent for good and change, and it's just absurd. But hopefully that will change now. But to think that that the Smithsonian would put her in the Hall of Fame and to still have the Margaret Sanger Award being given out, it's just like giving out the Ku Klux Klan Award. But even though their ideology and plan also was to pit the races against each other, you need a fall guy. And so the Klan, which unbeknownst to them was the fall guy, the true work of racism was being done once again behind the scenes. So where you have an outcry and outrage against the Klan and no outrage or outcry against Margaret Sanger, against the Margaret Sanger Award, against the Smithsonian honoring her, it's absurd, but it shows the depths of the deception and how deep it's gone. The ties presently, if you would go on Wall Street, you would find some of the most lucrative companies that have basically accumulated a lot of wealth quickly. They did so basically because of the slave trade. And yet it's those same entities you'll find, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Mellon, that have profited from the slave trade and amassed all this wealth, are now major players in the eugenics movement. In other words, the worth factor is now insignificant. It's not any advantage for them to have African Americans here. And before, I think it was Dick Gregory that said that during slavery, African Americans couldn't have babies fast enough. Then he said after slavery, there became a moratorium on having children. So this was the mindset, more or less. It was to no one's advantage. It wasn't to their advantage for them to see the African American population to grow. But yet these are, even today, very extremely wealthy businesses and entities, but yet if you do any of the research, you find that it was more or less accumulated during the time of slavery. And we were trying to, as a course, follow the money. There were eugenics boards in states throughout this country. These states more or less practice sterilization. They practice, of course, giving out contraceptives, but punishing African Americans, minority children, minority women with sterilization, and also withholding benefits from them if they chose not to be sterilized. Coercion of this, unquestionably even today, it's a little bit more subtle, but at that time, benefits were withheld. Benefits such as food stamps or food supplies. So it is unquestionably something of a ideology that has been prevalent, especially after slavery, and about controlling the numbers of minorities and African Americans. The last eugenics board, I believe, closed in 1981. I think it was Portland's. But to make a long story short, the government began to see the problems of being in the eugenics business in this nation. You had the Tuskegee incident. And so this was bad press. They began to say, it'd be better if we withdraw. And of course, the reason why they could withdraw, there was someone else who had already changed their name, and that was more than willing to continue the eugenics ideology, and that was Planned Parenthood. And to date, once again, if the taxpayer doesn't know it, $350 million last year went to Planned Parenthood from the government. And this goes through both administrations, Republican and Democrat. And so you find that Planned Parenthood, I believe, now is the number 2 or 3, became a mega institution from these resources being poured into them by the government. Why? The government got out of the business, and Planned Parenthood said, we'll do it for you.